Hey guys, welcome back. So this will be the last video in this series, and in this video we will implement Firebase and store data into Firebase. Okay, so before that, when you click on sign up, we don't have a method to show error messages. So for that we will use a third-party component. It's called React Native Snackbar, and we will install it and use it to show error messages. So this is very simple to use. Let's install it. Just copy paste this command and this will install it, and we need to import it like this. Let's import it in sign up screen, and we'll use this example in here, and you can add a text message here. Email and password are required. Password are required, and we don't need the duration, but we can use the background color property. So this should be an error message, so it should be red. Okay, so now if we click on sign up without data, it will show email and password are required. Okay, so next is we need to comment this and add a sign up method. We have a create a user with email and password method from Firebase. We'll use that, and we need to use await before it. Okay, so we will use our auth service in this and pass email and password. Okay, so because we are using await, we need to make this function async. So let's do that. And now when we click on sign up, this will create the user, but how will we know the user is created? For that, we need to implement a function in app navigation. Firebase has a method for on all states changed. We need to import that. Basically, this method will be triggered whenever a user logs in, signs out, or whenever a user is created. We need to pass the all service, and we will have a callback with that user. Let's console log this user, and next we need to dispatch this user here. To dispatch it, we need to use the use dispatch hook. Basically, dispatch will dispatch an action that we created in a previous video. This will set the user in our Redux store. So let's use the dispatch hook. Use dispatch like this, and we will dispatch an action set user. Sorry, not like this. Set user like this, and we'll pass the user object. Okay, so this will set the user into our Redux state, and whenever that happens, we will be navigated to the home screen. Okay, so let's sign up with the test user. Test at gmail.com, password, and whenever I sign up, you'll see a new user created in the console log, and we are successfully navigated to the home screen. And let me expand this. So we have successfully created a user, and this user has these values, but we will be using only UID from this user. This is a unique ID for that user. We will use this ID later in the application to store the trips for this user. Okay, so this navigation is displaying because we are logged in, and you can see the user in the Firebase console. If we go to the authentication, you can see we have a new user here, test@gmail.com. Okay, so our sign up is working perfectly. Now let's move to the sign in screen and implement sign in from Firebase. Okay, so we have this. First, let's add a snack bar from sign up screen. This will show the same error if email or password are not present. So let's import it as well. Just copy this and import it here. Okay, so next we will use a sign in method from Firebase. It's called the sign in with email and password. We will use that. Let's comment these and use await keyword, await, and sign in with email and password. Okay, so we need to provide auth service and email and password. Okay, so because this we are using await, we need to make this async method, and this will handle the sign in. Okay, so let's see the console and let's sign in. If I click on sign in, this will show the error. Okay, and let's sign in with the user that we created previously. Oh, okay, so we are successfully moving to the home screen. That means we are logged in. So the login is working. The next thing is to implement the logout. Okay, so we are in the home screen and we need to add an on-press method to this handle logout, and we will use a log sign out method from Firebase. So you will see this is very easy to sign out. Let's make it async method, and we will use sign out method from Firebase. Now let's click on that. Okay, we have an error, sign out of undefined. Okay, I think we need to pass the authentication service as well. Maybe this will work then. Okay, let's click on it. Okay, so our sign up is also working and we are getting the user as null because this triggered the on auth state change method. Okay, so the next thing is to implement a loading component here, because when the user is signing in or signing out, we will need a loading component. So let's create a loading component. Okay, we will use a loading function from React Native. It's built into the React Native. It's called activity indicator. We will use that, and we have a size property in it. Set it to large and a color, and we will use our own color from our theme, colors dot button. Okay, and let's design it to make it centered. Flex row and justify center, and let's give it a padding vertically. Okay, our loading component is finished. Now let's use it into our sign in screen. Okay, so we have a button here, and we will use a loading to check if the if user is signing in. But before that, we need to import this loading from our uh, Redux. So the way we can use that is to use selector hook. So we'll get the user loading. This gives us the root state, and we can pick the user loading from user slice like this. Okay, so we will use this user loading, and if user is loading, then we need to add the loading component. Sorry, we need to change the name of this loading component, loading, like this. Now if we type this, it will auto import it here. And when user loading is false, we need to display sign in button like this. Okay, so to set the user loading, we also need to set it when user is signing in. So we need to do this when user presses the sign in, like here. But we need to use a dispatch method. So we'll use dispatch hook and dispatch the action set user loading. And we will set it to true here. And we will set it to false when signing is done. Okay, we'll paste it here. Dispatch, and we will set the user loading false here like this. Okay, so we also need to wrap it in a try catch block, so whenever there is an error, we'll show the user that you have an error, like wrong password or invalid email. Okay, so let's add a snack bar here. This will show the error message to user. Let's just copy this. Sorry, we need to copy this here, and this will say e.message. This gives us the error message. We also need to add it here so that whenever there is an error, we need to stop the loading. Okay, so let's try this and see if the loader is working. Whenever I press in, we have a beautiful loading screen. Okay, so let's log out, and we need to add this to the sign up screen as well. So let's copy this try catch block and let's add it to the sign up screen here like this, and let's add the method here. Okay, and we also need to add the loader. So let's copy the user loading like this. Use selector, we need to import that, and we need to add the dispatch method as well. Let's use dispatch hook. Okay, so let's try it. Test to sign up. Okay, we have an error, and set user loading does not. Okay, we need to import set user loading like this. Let's try that. Okay, we are moving to the home screen, but we're not seeing the loading. That is because I think we haven't added the loading component. Okay, let's copy the loading component and move it to the sign up screen. Let's just copy this and paste it here like this. Okay, so let's log out and try sign up again. Test 3. Password. Okay, so the indicator is successfully working on sign up, and you can see the new users into your Firebase console. Okay, the sign up and sign in are completed. Now we need to move to the add trip screen, and let's add the trips to the Firestore. Okay, let's move to the add trip screen, and we need to implement this method. Okay, so first let's create a loading state. We don't need to use that into our Redux. We can use that into this component and use it here. This will show the loader for add trip button when the trip is creating, and use this button when the loading is false. Okay, so the next thing is to show the error, and we need to use the Snackbar. Let's copy it from home screen, sorry, sign up screen. Copy this to here, and we also need to copy this here, and we'll change the error message to place and country are required. Okay, so when we click on add trip, this will show the error. Okay, so now first of all we need to set the loading to true whenever user presses on the add trip, and then we need to use a method from Firebase. It's called the add doc. This will add the document to the trips. Add doc, we will import that, and we need to pass a reference of the collection. So we already have created this reference. If we move to the Firebase configuration, you can see we have trips reference. This is a collection, so we need to pass that, and the second parameter we need to specify that document, and this will have the place value and a country, and the third parameter would be user ID, and this user ID will be from the logged in user ID, and we can get that using a use selector hook. Use selector, this will give us the root state, and we need to pick the user slice, and we have the user value from the user slice. Now we need to use this user ID and set it to user.uid. This is a unique ID that every user has. And after that, we need to make this async method because we're using await. And after that, let's set the loading to false. Now we have a document that is created, and we need to check if this document has an ID. Then we need to go back to the home screen. So this will check if the document has an ID. Then we need to navigate back to the home screen. Okay, so our snack bar is working, and the process is very simple. User will enter the data, then we will start loading. We will add the document to the Firebase. We will stop the loading, and then we will go back to the home screen. But before that, we need to create the database that we haven't created yet. So let's move to the Firebase console and let's go to the Firestore database, and we need to create the database. Okay, so we'll use the test mode because we're not deploying the application anywhere. So the database is creating, and we won't need to add a collection here because whenever we add the data, it will auto create it. So let's add New York here and country America. When we add trip, this is showing the loader and it moves back to the home screen. It means we are successfully creating the document, and we can see that in our database that the trips is created and we have a document that we just created. Okay, so our implementation is working successfully. Okay, so let's create another trip. Islamabad, Pakistan. Okay, so it's successfully creating the trips. Now we need to move back to the home screen and fetch these trips so we can display them from database. So let's move to the home screen, and the first thing we need to do is import the user data because we will need to fetch the trips from that user. So let's import it from Redux. Use selector state. This will give us the user slice. Okay, now that we have the user, we need to create a method fetch trips. We will use this to get the trips from Firestore. Okay, so we need to make this async method, and the next thing is to query the database for our trips. So we'll be using query method from Firestore. Firestore query, and we will use our reference trips reference, and the next parameter is where clause. This is also a method from Firestore. This let us make a condition so that we can get all the trips where user ID is the ID of the currently logged in user. So this has three parameters. One is the property user ID that we're going to match. Next is the operator equal to, and the third one is the user ID. So this will get us all the trips for this user. Now we need to add a method get docs. Query snapshot. This gives us the query result, and we need to add get docs, and this will use our query and will return an array of all the documents. So let's console log them and see that for each. This gives us the document, and we have a method on each document dot data, so we can use that to display the document data. So let's see if they are displayed in the console. Let's add a document string to it as well. Okay, so let's see. It's still not displaying. Oh, because we haven't called it yet. So let's use the use effect hook. So this will call the fetch trips whenever the component mounts. So let's call the fetch trips. Okay, so now we have a different error. Get docs does not exist. Okay, I think we haven't imported the getDocs method, so let's import it. Docs, getDocs is imported. Now let's see the logs. Okay, so as you can see, we are displaying the documents. These are coming from the Firestore, but we don't see an ID in the trips. So to get the ID, we need to format this data. So the document ID can be found in the doc object. So let's create a new array and we will push all the data objects, document objects into this array. So let's create this array and we need to push the data with the ID into this array. So we will use spread operator to get the data and the ID can be found in the doc.id. So this will give us the formatted data that will have the ID as well. So we need to set this data here. But before that, let's create a new state, trips, and set trips. By default, they will have a value of empty array. And we will set this trips here. Set trips to data. Okay, so this will fetch the data and set the trips to the fetched data. But this is not displaying it. Oh yeah, we need to remove the items from the flat list and use our own trips. Okay, so we are successfully displaying the trips from the Firestore. So it means it's working, but we have a different problem with this. So let me show you what problem we have here. So if I create a new trip, let's say Gujarat and country Pakistan, when I add it, it won't show in the trips. And the reason because the home component was already mounted. So the fetch trips was not called again here. So we need a way to call the fetch trips whenever this component is in focus. So for that we can use a hook from React Native. It's called isFocused. This will give us the value true if whenever this screen is in focused. So okay, so when this area is in focus, this will be true. So we need to add this to the use effect dependency is focused. Whenever this changes, this use effect will be triggered and we will need to check if the is focused is true. Then we need to fetch the trips. So what this does is this will actually triggered whenever the screen is in focused. So let's add a new trip and see if this is working. So let's say London Eye and England. When I add trip, this will go back to the home screen and now it's triggering the fetch trips and all the trips are now updated. Okay, so the home screen is completed and now we need to move to the add trips expenses screen. For that we need to pass the trip data to the trip expenses screen and we're already doing that. We also need to pass this data to the add expense screen. So let's see if we are doing that. This is the data that we are fetching from home screen and we need to pass it to the add expense screen so that we can use the trip ID to store the expenses against this ID. Okay, so let's pass this data and we will have the ID and trip ID in this screen and we can use that to add the expense. Okay, so now let's add a snack bar here. We'll just copy paste from other component. Let's change this error message to please fill all the fields. Okay, so now we need to import the snack bar as well. Let's copy paste it here and if I click on it, it will show the error. Okay, and now let's add a loader. We will need a loading state for that. By default it will be false, and we will set it to true when user presses on the add expense. True. And let's create a new document here. We'll use the same method add doc, and this time we will use the reference from expense reference. So we'll import that expenses reference, because we will be storing the reference in the different collection. So we will have a title, amount, category, and the fourth one is trip ID. So okay, so we can get this trip ID from our props because we passed it from our home component. So let's use the ID from our props, and it is found in the props.route.params. Okay, so ID should be this. Okay, we also need to make this async because we're using await keyword here. So after that, whenever the document is created, we will set the loading to false, and we will check if the document is created. If we have a document and document has an ID, it means we have successfully created the ID, document, and then we will move back to the expense screen. Okay, so everything looks nice. Okay, so the snack bar is working. Now let's add the data. Let's say ate food for how much? For $5. Select category and add expense. Okay, so we are moving back to the expense screen. That means our object was created. So let's see the Firebase console. We have a new collection expenses, and it has an object that we just created. So our implementation is working successfully. Now we also need a loading button here because we didn't add the loading in this component. So let's just copy the loading from other component. We'll use this here, and we will just change the values. So this should be handle add expense, and this should be add expense. I save it. Okay, so we also need to import loader. Now let's try one more time and add a new expense. Bought a jacket, $200. Shopping, add expense. The loader is working, and we're moving back to the expense screen. That means it's working. So the next thing is to fetch this expense list from Firebase. For that, let's move to expense screen, and we will call the API here. Actually, let's just use the code from home component. So we will use this code. Yeah, we also need to use trips. We will just paste them and change their names. This should be expenses, and set expenses, and the method name should be fetch expenses. Okay, so we need to use this method here, and we also need to import use is focused hook, and this one we need to use expenses reference, and we need to match the trip ID with the ID that we are getting from props. Okay, we also need to get docs. It is imported. Okay, so this will format the data and get us the data, and we will set the expenses here. Okay, so the use state does not exist. We'll import it, and everything looks fine. We just need to remove the items and add expenses. Okay, so let's move to the Auth. Use effect is not imported. Okay, use effect, and okay, now we have this error. Where does not exist. We need to import where. Okay, this. Okay, still has an error. Freeze settings of undefined. That's strange. Our implementation looks right. Okay, this should be expense reference. Maybe that caused it. Okay, so the error is gone and we are fetching the expense list from Firestore. Okay, so the implementation is working. Let's add a new expense. Bought a hot dog, $3. Food, add expense. This will add the expense and show it here. Okay, so with this our application is completed, and you can obviously go to the other trips and add expense to those, like petrol for $300, and we'll select the category others, add. This will show the expenses in this trip, and if you move to other trips, this will show the data. If you're still confused about my Firebase implementation, I just use the Firebase methods from version 9. So you can go to the Firebase documentation page, and you can find the documentation for these methods. So if you move to the documentation page, you will see sample codes here. I'm using version 9, so you can see they are implementing collections. This is a collection, and this is how they are querying the data. So this is very easy to, you just need to copy and paste the code into your application, and this will work perfectly. Okay, so our series is completed, and if you still have any questions about anything, you can just comment them down and I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Or if you want me to create more videos on React Native, I will do that as well. Until then, bye and take care.